Good evening, everyone. We continue with 1 Samuel chapter 15. We ended with verse 9. I just want to take one verse back so that we can connect it today. It is at a period of time when God told Saul through the mouth of Samuel to destroy the people of Amalek, including Agag. And not to have pity on him. And all the animals were to be haram, to be destroyed, to be banned. And so the idea of ban means it is labeled as not wanted. And so that's the whole picture that we were told that they were supposed to do. But when we reach verse 9, we see that the people, Saul and the people, spared Agag, and they also spared the best of sheep, oxen, fatling, lambs, and all that was good. And they were, this is the key, they were not willing to destroy them utterly. Now, this idea, destroy them utterly, and utterly destroy them, these words here is about the concept of ban, right? Of ban and prohibition. It is to be completely destroyed. Now, we went through the words of God spoken through Samuel to Saul, and there wasn't anything difficult or abstract or complex or deep in the instructions. As we move on from here into verse 10, you would see that the anger that God had for the Amalek has turned on to Saul. Verse 10 begins our session today. The word of the Lord came to Shemuel. Now, again, as you know, the word is davar. And as usual, davar means the issues, the matters. There's something that God needs to deal with regards to this particular event. Verse 11, God says to Samuel, notice this is God to Samuel. And so this is the conversation. And God says, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. First of all, you need to see that turn back from following me is an A, and has not carried out my command is a B. So we have two parts that really says very much the same thing. And Samuel was distressed and cried out to the Lord all night. Let's unpack this a little bit. This is a very emotional phrase, right? Verse here. First of all, God regrets to have made Saul king. This word, regret, is nacham. Now, this word is very important, nacham. It gives us the picture of one to feel sorry, to have pity, right? Or have compassion. And then it says here to suffer grief, right? And of course, the word regret is there. Now, this particular word that is used here is also the same word used in Genesis chapter 6. After God made man and man became corrupt, and God says, I will destroy the world. And God regretted. At least that's what the English means. I would suggest that it's not exactly as our English word regret. But if you think of it this way, God had made Saul king, and he is looking at what has happened with Saul and those incidents, and this one here in chapter 15, first in chapter 13, then in chapter 15, has made God grievous, I would say. You would think of it this way, that God is very disappointed with Saul. That would be the meaning of Nahum in this case, that God had went through the trouble of choosing Saul and of making him king, and has tried to make him successful, and in such a crucial moment of executing the judgment of God upon the Amalekites, he failed. Now, did he fail completely? Well, it depends on how you look at it, and so let's break this down. So God feels sorry that he had made Saul king. God is grievous. God is very disappointed with Saul. And because God made Saul king, and Saul did not comply and did not provide God with any encouragement that that was a good decision. Well, it looked good in the first, but as it progressed on, Saul doesn't seem to fit the bill. And the reason being is this: he has turned back. This is Shuv. He has turned back from following me, meaning Saul was following God, and then he had turned back. This is the meaning of turn back. The second part is the emphasis. It's saying very much the same thing. What about turning back from following God that God was upset with? He has not carried out my commands. So now we know this turn back is equals to not carrying out God's commands. Okay, so let's take a look. The word carried out, this word carried out, in the English, it means carried out. But in the Hebrew, you find that this word means to, how should we say, to carry out, to give effect, right? Give effect, to establish. And I think you can say bring to pass. The idea here being that the commands of God is spoken through the lips of Samuel and given to Saul, such that Saul will now carry out the duty of accomplishing or bringing to pass or giving effect to the judgment of God upon the Amalekites. And when he failed to do that, now, did he fail to do that? You need to think about it. So God says he has not carried out my commands. And that means he has turned back from following me. And so think of it, this is God's perspective. From a human perspective, we could say, well, he was empowered. He made certain decisions that he thought was good. Now, is that how God deals with his king, his people, and his instructions? Obviously, Samuel was aware, and Samuel was distressed. The idea of distress here was furious. Samuel was furious. It's not distress as in, oh, I'm just troubled by it. This really means that he was incensed. He was utterly angry, glowing in heat. The nose is hot. And then he cried out to God. This is a good word. He cried out to God all night in his frustration. He feels the frustration of God. And the whole night long, as God has spoken to him, and probably God came to him at night. And so that whole night, he was not able to sleep, and he was so troubled by what God had said. Very simple words that God says, I nacham that I have made Saul king, for he has shuv from following me and has not brought to pass my commands. And that is two things that refer to the same. And Samuel was peeved. Verse 12, Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul. Notice the prophet of God doesn't shy away from confrontation. The prophet of God rose early to resolve this issue with Saul. And it was told Samuel that Saul came to Carmel. Now, remember, Mount Carmel is, it's near Haifa today. It's a hill where it's very fertile, agricultural, and that would be the place where we speak of Elijah. And behold, Saul set up a monument for himself. Now, what do you mean monument for himself? Well, it means that he had cause to take a stand, right? Set up a monument. In the Hebrew is that would be cause to take a stand. Now, in the English, it doesn't mean much to us, but setting up a monument is a good translation. But I think more importantly, this would be an altar. And then later on in 1 Kings 18, verse 30, Elijah went to rebuild this altar because it was destroyed. And so Saul wanted to build an altar. And with that, we see that he had meant well, right? He had meant well. And after that, he turned and proceeded down to Gilgal. Gilgal would be towards the southeast, besides the Jordan River. So that's the scenario. Verse 12 gives us a snapshot of the meeting between Samuel and Saul. Verse 13, Samuel came to Saul. Now we are at Gilgal. Saul said to him, blessed are you, right? Blessed are you of the Lord. This word says, no, may you be a blessed one. God will be happy. That I think in a more colloquial sense is, God will be happy and God will bless you because since you are closer to God and you speak to God, you know what? I have carried out the command of the Lord. And that is in Saul's mind. And we should begin to decipher exactly how Saul would see things and exactly how God would view things. So we would have two perspectives. One, the perspective of God. That means that Saul did not carry out the commands. This is what we can see here. The second one is the perspective of Saul. He did a great job that he thinks that God is going to be extremely happy and he's going to bless Samuel. That's verse 13. Now we are beginning to see that there is such a disjoint in understanding. Saul cannot see eye to eye with God in this matter. Verse 14. But Samuel said, he says, what is this bleating of the sheep in my ears? Bleating, actually in the Hebrew, it just says, what is this sound? So the English use a nicer word, right? Use a nicer word. Same thing. What is the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And this word lowing is sound. As you can see, the English translators tries to make the English translation very readable, but they supplied a lot of words. So in Hebrew, Samuel says, what is this sound of sheep that I can hear? What is the sound of the oxen which I can hear? So both here, A and B, are both talking about animal sounds, which is audible, right? Audible, A and B, animal sounds. Why was Samuel very curious? Because there was banned animals. Banned animals means all animals. But in verse 9, they only killed the weak and the sick and the lame, right? The things that is not good, they were all killed, but they kept the best of all the animals. And this is the sound that Samuel has heard. Verse 15, Saul said, Saul is now making a defense. It's very similar to Genesis chapter 3 when God spoke to the man and then spoke to the woman, and each of them gave a certain excuse, right? The man said, well, it's the woman you made. No, she made me eat. So Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites. The people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we have utterly destroyed. And so this was what he was pleased with. He thinks that this was the instructions, but if you look at it this way, it is Saul who is saying they are responsible. Who is they? The people. It's the people who did that, right? It's the people who did that. Now, unfortunately, he can't hide from God. Verse 16, Samuel said to Saul, he says, wait. The idea here is cause yourself, right? Cause yourself to be quiet. And basically, shush, right? Don't talk, or basically stop talking. Because the more you say, the worse it becomes. And Samuel said, look, let me tell you what God said to me last night. And then Saul said to Samuel, speak. Speak. What is the matter? This is Davar, and it's about matters and issues. What is the problem? Verse 17. It's getting more and more sober as we go down the verses. Samuel said, Samuel is asking a question. Is it not true? Is it not true? Hello. Though you were little in your own eyes, you were made head of the tribes of Israel. And the Lord anointed you king over Israel. Now, in this particular verse, you would find that, well, let's go on to the next one. And the Lord sent you on a mission. So all of these is a connected background. So let's break this up. It says, is this not true? You tell me, did God not do this, though you were little in your own eyes, being from Benjamin? Remember, Benjamin is the youngest son of Jacob, and God chose Benjamin to rule over them. So if you take a look at Psalms chapter 68, verse 28, you would have a better idea that little means nothing, because when God thinks that you can do the job, God will put you into the picture. And that's what God did to put Saul there. It says, you think you were not worthy, God made you so. You were made the head of the tribes of Israel. Now, the head here would be the chief, right? The chief. This is literally head, right? Literally the head. And in a more picture imagery standpoint, whoever is the head is the one that is in its greatest power. And so God says, you think you were little, God made you the greatest. So this is a series of a contrast of A and A prime. The contrast of something small, or the smallest of the youngest of the tribes, versus the greatest. He is the head. What more do you want? You're no longer the heel. You're now the head. Then we have another A and B. You were anointed king over Israel. God anointed, but physically Samuel did. So Samuel anointing or smearing oil over the head of Saul is actually doing it on behalf of God. And the Lord sent you on a mission. This is a B. Now, why do I call this a B? Because God doesn't send anybody else on a mission because he is king over Israel. He has a mission. That's fundamentally what it says. What is a mission? Sent you on a journey. Send you on a path. Now, this is interesting because as a picture, it means that this is Saul, and God says, this is the path that you should go to. And so this is what is called the mission here, right? The mission. And if you are to walk the path, you can only walk the path if you follow exactly what was said. Had you then decided to walk away from the path this way, then you will never arrive in its objective. And hereby we are beginning to see why God was very disappointed. These are the commands of God. But Saul did part of the commands. The other part is to turn away. He didn't do the rest. And so in the eyes of God, doing a part of the commands of God is tantamount to not doing it. For example, you are to build a house, but at the end of the day, you only bought the bricks, but you made a car instead. And thereby you would say that, yes, I have done the buying part, but eventually the end result became something else. And so in the mind of God, the end is important. The means towards the end is also important, because the means, as you travel this journey or this path, shows that you are complying to the commands of God so that you can reach the ultimate objective. The moment you turn away and says, well, I've walked part of the journey, you will never arrive at the end. And that's the picture of a path. So the English, of course, will like to use the word mission, but the Hebrew literally says journey or path. God put oil over you and gave you this formal role as king over his people, Israel. And then God sent you. This word again, sent, is shalach, is to represent God. What was this journey? To inflict total ban, to inflict total ban, to impose haram onto the Amalekites. Everybody, man, women, children, animals, all must die. It was to represent God, to execute a judgment upon the Amalekites. And yesterday we saw how the Amalekites, as a son of um, a son of the son of Esau, right? A grandson of Esau, and they came against the Israelites as they crossed the Red Sea, trying to exterminate them, and then they failed. And all through the book of Judges, you see the Amalekites trying again and again and again. And God had placed a ban on them, and once the haram ban was upon them, they are to die. And Saul was the what we call the person that God had entrusted, given this authority to represent God, to walk this path. The path is to go and totally destroy the sinners. God calls them the sinners. The Amalekites, fight them until they are exterminated. Now, this word is not really exterminated. This word means bring to an end. Okay, bring to an end. But it also means cause to cease, which means that the Amalekites, God had given Saul the authority to represent him on this mission to cancel out the Amalekites as a judgment upon them. Now, I hope that we are beginning to see God's perspective of things is not quite like how man would see things, right? How man would see things is completely different. Verse 19, the question is asked, why did you not obey? The word obey here is hear. Didn't you hear the voice of the Lord? Now, what is the voice of the Lord? The sound of the Lord. How did Saul hear the sound of God? Through Samuel, right? Through Samuel. Did you not hear? And then you rushed, you flew down, you were so eager to get the spoil. And then you did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Let's not use the word sight, right? The eyes of the Lord. And so evil is the word ra. And again, evil is in the eyes of the beholder. The eyes of the beholder. And so what we are seeing here is this. If you heard the instructions of God, you wouldn't have done what you did, which means that you did not hear. Now, what do you mean hear? Well, the word hear is usually translated as obey. And I've used this example before. If you were to tell your kid, go pick up the toys, and you gave the instructions, and it was very clear, it was unambiguous, and the child just continued doing what he did, or maybe he picked up one piece, right? Let's say he picked up one piece. Then you come back after half an hour and you found another 9 pieces on the floor. What would you be saying? Did you not hear what I said? No, that is exactly this verse 19. Did you not hear what I said, what God said? What I said about God, the voice of God is coming through my lips. Did you not hear? And so the word hear has the same meaning as listening, processing, and executing. Because he did not hear, he did this. He rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of God. What is evil? The word evil, as we are talking about, is things that is, how would you say, things which is not right, right? Things is not right, uh, not according to one's desire. Okay, I think let's use this definition, and then I'll show you what it means. It says you did what was not right in the eyes of the Lord. You did what was not according to God's desire in the eyes of the Lord. Now, this in the eyes of the Lord is very important because God can see, which also means that this will be a judgment that will pass, because whatever Saul did was real, it was visual, it was experienced, it was known, it was observed, it was seen in the eyes of God, and God put a stamp on it and says, that's evil. It is not right in my eyes. You may think that is right, but who cares? God gave the instruction. God cares that it is carried out correctly. That's what it means. When you do not hear the sound of God or sound of God's voice through the instruction, it means that you will ignore what God has said. And when you ignore what God has said and you do those things that is not right or not desirable in the eyes of God, it is called evil. And God can see. And when God can see, God will judge. Notice, judgment is not upon the heart, what you have thought. Judgment is actually executed upon what one has done. Verse 20. Verse 20 reads, then Saul said to Samuel, he is still not giving in, right? I did obey the voice of the Lord, meaning I did hear. I heard, right? I did hear the sound of the voice of God. Then I actually went on the journey which the Lord sent me. Notice this is the journey right here. The path. And he was sent by God, and this authorizes Saul to represent God in all these actions. But look at what he finally said. He said, I have brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and then I have completely haram the Amalekites. I implemented the haram rule. I went and executed them, but I brought back Agag. Second thing that he admitted is in verse 21. Verse 21 says, but the people, not me, the people, they took of the spoil, sheep, oxen, the best of the things devoted to destruction. When God says everything to be destroyed, well, they kept back the things that is the best. The best here is Reshit, right? Like the Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, right? The start, the best. We can say that. Of the things devoted to the ban, the haram. God says haram means everything, but the people kept it back. Why? Because they had a good reason. The reason is they want to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. Now that we're here, let's sacrifice to God. Now, look at this, that he has missed the entire point. God says, do not have uh, pity on on Agag. Do not, you must destroy everyone, men, women, children, animals, including the king. But that was not carried out. So, in the perspective of God, when the rules that of God or the commands of God were just obeyed in part, when your child picked up only one toy, would you consider him having obeyed? No. And similar with God. You may think you have obeyed, but in God's eyes, you have done evil. You have changed my command. You have treated my command as not important. You forgot who gave that command. And so when the child says, well, I picked up one, and what does that mean? It means that the child has no respect for the parent to listen to what the parent says. And similarly, in the same case, God faulted Saul because Saul did not obey God's commands. Well, following a part is as good as not following at all. If we were to boil rice, and we're supposed to put 1 cup of rice and 2 cups of water, and then instead of putting 2 cups of water, we put 2 cups of kerosene. Well, we still put the rice, we turn on the rice cooker, but nothing is going to happen because you did not follow the full recipe of the instructions, and it's not going to work. So, in the eyes of God, that is how God views it. But in the eyes of Saul, he did good. Now, verse 22. Verse 22 is the crucial verse. It says, has the Lord much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as opposed to obeying the voice of God? So why don't you compare? Compare this delight is take pleasure. Take pleasure. And the idea here is, will God show him being pleased with burnt offering, which is a olah, it is burnt, and the smoke and the aroma rises up, right? It rises up. Sacrifice, savak, which is slaughter, that you kill, you spill the blood. And these are the rituals, right? Rituals of honoring God, of giving thanks to God. The second part is to hear the sound of the voice of God. Meaning, God did not consider Saul listening to him. Saul considers himself listening to God, but God did not consider Saul listening to him. The next line is important. Behold, and this word, to obey, to hear the words of God, to hear the voice of God, to hear and to act on it. It is better than sacrifice. If you give a sacrifice, what do you think God will choose? Will God choose 1 or 2? The next line is an A and a B, right? This is A and this is B. Look at this. To heed, then the fat of rams. Now, what does it mean? First of all, heed. To heed is to pay attention. Listen to God and go and do it. The fat of rams, on the other hand, fat fat literally means the fat of animals, it is the best part. If you look into the book of Leviticus, in all the rituals, right? The best part has to do with the rituals. God says that the fat of these animals belong to God. It's the best part because when you burn the fat, the smell that goes up to heaven would be pleasing to God. But the question in verse 22 is God taking more pleasure in the aroma and burnt offering compared to obeying the voice of God? No, this is a rhetorical question with an answer. The answer is, of course, obeying is better than the sacrifices and burnt offerings. And so the answer is clear. The answer comes in this fashion. Behold, look, to hear. Right? We are using the same word, to hear. To hear is better. The word better is tov. Tov. Tov is good. Now, look, we have a contrast, right? When Saul disobeyed God, it was ra. It was evil in the eyes of God. And now Samuel is expressing what is tov, what is good in the eyes of God. Not everything has the same value. Now, God is very fair. Not every sin is measured the same way here. And so, if you were to compare between burnt offerings and sacrifices and hearing God's voice, then what is good would be to obey, to hear. Rituals, not important. Rituals is not important. The fat of rams, the aroma, no big deal. God made the animals anyways. But God wants them to be in a good relationship with God before you offer sacrifices. God doesn't want the sacrifice because of the sacrifice. God wants the sacrifice because the people have been right with God, has been good with God, has been doing things that is pleasing in God's sight, and hence the rituals have a meaning. That is what Samuel is trying to depict here. Listening to what God said and to do exactly. So the word obey or to hear, shamar, is not just to pick up the sounds, but this the whole process of hearing the sounds, picking up the voice, processing the words, understanding what is said, making a decision, and going out to do it. That the whole thing there as an imagery is to hear. And God says, that is what I want. I don't care about the animals that you keep. When I said, do not leave anything, it means do not leave anything. You don't need a PhD to understand what God has said. And hence, this is why God is extremely, extremely disappointed. And God says, I nacham. I feel so sorry because I gave Saul a chance and one after another. And this time round, he thinks he's done great. But in my eyes, he is hopeless. Verse 23 is a continuation. The continuation works this way. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, or is like, right? Is like. And insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry, is like. And immediately you can say that this is an A and this is a B, because we have the two lines that is emphatic. First of all, what is rebellion here? Actually, the word is the word rebellion uh is to how should we say to to go against, I guess you can say, to go against, to go against, to go against disobedient. It is this word here. Rebellion is when you go against God. When God says, do A, you do a part of A and you change it to a B. That is going against. Disobedient, you're supposed to listen to the entire instruction of God. You only listen to half of it. And that's an accurate picture. If you go against and be disobedient to God, it is like the sin of divination, that you go and trust on witchcraft, right? You trust on false prophets. You listen to witches who has um, who has the skills of science, right? The science of alchemy, and basically to distract the people to trust in the words of man instead of the words of God. And that is the sin of divination. Insubordination, on the other hand, um, is, how should we say, um, cause to be cause to be stubborn. Was Saul stubborn? And the answer is yes. Right? Yes. He is seen as Avon and Teraphim. Teraphim means little idols, having little idols. So all of these are are things that God considers as an abomination, that God will be disgusted. God will judge on this. And so was Saul stubborn? Yes. He refused to admit that he has done wrong. Even Adam and Eve admitted, yes, I ate. But Saul said, I have done great. May you be blessed of the Lord. I have done everything God has said, but I have spared Agag. And the people decided that they wanted these animals. That continuously have pushed away God in his defense. And Samuel says, you know what? You are being rebellious against God. You are being stubborn or insubordinate. When God says do A, you should just go and do A. Why do you do B in that sense? In that sense, right? That is something which is important for us to understand. Because by doing rebellion and insubordination, you would find that God says in verse 23, you have rejected the word of the Lord. Now, the word rejected is, how should you say, this is to despise, I think would be good, right? This word rejected here would be to despise. Despise means to how should we say, to treat in contempt, to treat as um treat as not important. I think you can say that, right? Treat or contempt. Basically, God is saying, I have told you to do this and you have changed it, and that tantamounts to rejecting, to despising what I say. You don't care what I say. Aren't I God? Aren't I the God that made you king? Aren't I the God that anointed you? And the answer is yes. And so If you have spurned me, you don't treat me as that. God used the same word. God will reject you from being king. This same word literally means that I will despise you, I will treat you as not important, and thereby reject. Now, this rejection means what? In effect, God is not going to deal with Saul anymore as king. God really don't care about Saul from here on. The, the throne is over. That is what verse 23 reads. The throne is over. You don't care what I say. I don't care about you completely. You think you are being smart, trying to do things your way. Well, I've got news for you, God said. Your time of being king will soon come to an end. I don't want you to be king. And with this, we come to the end of verse 23. We have not completed chapter 15, and we'll continue tomorrow, and then we'll go on to chapter 16. With this, this is the end of our session today.